How's everybody doing?
Good, Matt. Hope you are.
Good to hear you're doing well, Jack. Lance, Tim,
Doing good. Hope you are.
Mr. Klutz, good to see you.
How you doing, Matt? Good to see you.
Glad the link made it through this time.
Yes, sir.
Well, it looks, I'm showing 3:30, so we'll go ahead and get things moving. Greetings and welcome to the May Ordinance Advisory Board meeting. In light of the state's declaration of emergency due to COVID-19, the meeting today is being conducted remotely. We'll each begin by identifying ourselves so that the record can reflect who is present and participating in the meeting. I am Matt Jones, participating remotely. Tim Taylor.
Present.
Thomas Finley.
Present.
Frank Gammon.
Frank Gammon, present.
Amy Holman. Amy, you there? I can see you, but I can't hear you. I will come back to her. Kathy Jones. She made it in yet? No. Okay. Mr. Klutz.
I'm present.
Brandy Skelly.
Brandy Skelly, present.
Harrison Whitaker. Not made it yet. Commissioner Munger.
Munger, present.
And Amy Hallman. Can you hear us? She must
Send her a quick text.
Yeah, she must not be able to hear us. We can see her, but I'm not sure if she's hearing us. So Kathy Jones and Harrison Whitaker are not present at the moment, for the record.
Matt, this is Frank Gammon. I just talked to Kathy. I thought she said she had just got in. She was having to go through her browser, so she's attempting to get in now.
Okay, all right. Oh, hey. Okay, Kathy Jones, can you acknowledge you're here? Yeah, I think so. Doesn't look like the audio is connected yet.
Hey, I'm here.
Okay, gotcha. Amy, can you hear us by chance? It does not look like it. Amy, can you hear us? Looks like still having some audio problems. She's technically here, so let's mark that down.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Can you hear us? Amy, can you hear us? I guess not. Okay, so everyone except for Mr. Whitaker
Says I am.
is present. We can hear you. The question is, can you hear us?
They can be. I can hear now. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, all right. So, first thing on the agenda, item B1, adoption of the April 7, 2022 minutes. One quick clarification. I believe the last meeting, Commissioner Munger went back to being a voting member. Am I correct?
That's very accurate.
Okay, and we just got him marked as a non-voting member on the meeting minutes. We just need to consider that as an adjustment.
Matt, I'll just jump in. This is Emily. We still don't have the updated rules signed by the mayor.
Okay, so they don't apply then until they're signed.
Yeah, we still don't have those, to my knowledge. I'll reconfirm with Tracy and Janet, but I haven't seen anything come in.
Okay, so with that being said, how do we handle that today in terms of who's voting and who isn't?
So I would treat it as until we have the new rules signed, the old rules are applicable.
Okay, got it. All right,
Ask a
Commissioner,
question related to that.
Yeah, really.
go right ahead.
Since I did vote in the last meeting, how does that affect anything that I voted on the last meeting?
I believe Tracy, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we still had a majority on everything.
I will be quiet during this meeting then.
No, you're still able to participate. It's just just not on the voting aspect of it, Commissioner Munger. I mean, you know, you can comment everything else. You know how this goes. All right. Well, we'll with that being said, I'll open the floor up for a motion for approval of the minutes from the April 7, 2022 meeting.
This is Brandy Skelly. I make a motion to approve the minutes for April 7th.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second. Alden.
Quick roll call. Matt Jones approve. Tim Taylor.
Tim Taylor, approve.
Thomas Finley.
Approve.
Frank Hammond.
Approve.
Amy Hallman.
Alden approve.
Kathy Jones.
Approve.
Joseph Lutz.
I approve.
Brandy Skelly.
Approve.
And it looks like Mr. Whitaker has joined us. Harrison Whitaker. Well, he may not have connected yet. I can see that he's here, but can you hear us, Mr. Whitaker?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, yes, I approve.
Okay. Oh, and if you can turn your camera on, if you can, as well.
I'm gonna switch computers real quick, so I'll sign back next one.
Okay, all right. All right. Is anyone signed up for public comments today? Okay, so no public comments. Moving on to the lone item on our agenda, item D1, consider recommendation on TA 2205. I will turn the floor over to the staff and let the fun begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the town board has requested the public hearing on moving subdivision regulations from a quasi-judicial process. That's going to move it now to an administrative process as the proposal is before them. To do that, it's going to require, amendments, obviously, to the subdivision ordinance. And your agenda packet has the full subdivision ordinance. All the changes are noted in there. And there also will have to be some related changes to the zoning ordinance, and that also is included in your agenda packet. While we're making these adjustments, we're also making some minor corrections to the language that's in the ordinance, state statute citations, both the zoning and subdivision ordinances, and these are not substantive in nature. So just to be clear, what else is involved in this text amendment. The only other thing I would mention is the town board had a public hearing on Monday, this past Monday. they have not received your recommendation, so they decided to continue that public hearing until Monday, June the 6th at 6 p.m. at Huntersville Town Hall. And then if anybody had watched the proceedings, there was a lot of questions and a lot of, I guess trying to find out which way to go. So there's a lot riding on it, and we're ready to get right into the details. Again, I just want to highlight the school of government basically says that if you have a subdivision process that is clear and objective standards, it's an administrative decision. But if there's any kind of standards that require judgment and discretion, that's going to be quasi-judicial. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is what the statutes say on who's the final decision authority. If the final decision of the subdivision plat is administrative, it says it may be assigned to staff or staff person or committee of people. It could also be the town board, it could be the planning board, it could be any appointed board. However, if a decision is quasi-judicial, it has to be assigned to a governing board, a planning board, or the Board of Adjustments, or other board that's appointed pursuant to the chapter. So again, quasi-judicial today, it's assigned to our governing board. They make the decisions. As a reminder, the UNC report that was published in December of 2020, it's a 2018 survey. 72% of the 275 jurisdictions that were surveyed, the answer to the survey, 72% had only objective standards, and 28% had subjective standards, so or discretionary standards, if you will. And that's obviously what where we are at. We're in that 28% range. So again, the sketch plan is a 3-step process. There's a subdivision sketch plan, a preliminary, and a final. The sketch plan is kind of general in nature. It's for the entire development. It shows us the roads, the lot layouts, the concept plan for stormwater and other things. Planning board makes a recommendation. It goes to the town board as a quasi-judicial decision. Once that subdivision is approved, then the developer prepares a preliminary plat, which is detailed engineering drawings, and that is a staff approval. And then once that is approved, then all the infrastructure gets installed, the water, the sewer, the grading, the trees removed, all that stuff occurs. And once all the infrastructure is in, then they come in with the final plat, which is meets and bound description of every lot, and right-of-ways and easements and all of those things, and that gets recorded in the Register of Deeds, and that is a staff approval as well. So we are modifying with this process the subdivision sketch plan process only. And so the current standards are, we do have some subjective standards, so therefore there's a sketch plan that's prepared, there's a neighborhood meeting that the developer holds, then it goes to the planning board for a recommendation, and then the town board holds a quasi-judicial hearing. This text amendment as it's been presented. The proposal is for all objective standards, and that would allow us to follow an administrative process. Still would be a sketch plan application. There would be a neighborhood meeting. It is now more intended to inform citizens about the rules and regulation and what's the development being proposed. As it proposed now, this planning board would not make a recommendation, and as it's proposed now, it would be a staff decision. This is following what the North Carolina School of Government recommends, that the staff approve it since there's no room for policy choices or discretion. But please do keep in mind, it could be sent to a planning board or a town board or even a board of adjustment for that matter. So that is the process that we have has been proposed. The section I want to point out, and I'm going over some of the same things that we did the last go-round, but it's important to understand. It's in section 6.200 today. At the very top of the page, you see in black, it says general requirements. And so under that 6.200, the general requirements, they're all things that the developer shall do. To go to an administrative process, we need to remove requirements that have discretion. And so the proposal is to take this section 2.00 and turn it into 6.200A and 6.200B. And A is the guidelines, and B will be requirements. So these things that you see on the screen on the left-hand side, these are, at this point in time, these are guidelines. These are not requirements. These are guidelines. And the first one talks about consistency with adopted plans. The second one, which gives probably, I would say, the most ability to negotiate adjustments.
Jack,
Yes.
are you trying to show a PowerPoint presentation? Because I don't see it.
Is that right?
The agenda was still up, Jack, Frank Gammon.
Okay. So let me escape from that. So now, do you see anything? Okay.
Your smiling face, that's it.
Yeah. Well, I apologize for that. Let's see. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go this route. So you see the School of Government. How about now? You see the School of Government comment?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Very good. I'm not going to be able to do away with these slides over here to the left. So it's just the way my system is set up. And thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm not going to go over all this again. This was the percentage of folks that have objective standards, and this is the percentage of folks that have some discretionary standards, and we're in that 28%. And then here is the current process that we have, which is quasi-judicial, and here's the proposed, which is administrative. And this is the section that I was wanting to point out. Today's section 6.200 says general requirements, and we're modifying it to have general guidelines and requirements. And section 6.2A, general guidelines, are now things that used to be requirements, but now they're just guides. And the first one is consistency with adopted plans. The second one has to do with subdivisions and conformity. And subdivisions today, it says shall be planned to facilitate most advantageous development of the entire neighboring area. What I was saying was that this is the section that gives the town board kind of the most ability to help ask for modifications to changes to development. Earlier today, I was discussing with Kathy how this works. And we had a development that was right next to large lot kind of farmette houses. And at the neighborhood meeting, the residents asked for a setback greater than the 20-foot minimum. And the developer said, well, I'm meeting the town's requirements. And after the meeting, I pointed out that the town board could utilize this section, and neighbors could use this section to ask for greater setbacks. And in the end, they modified their plan before it went to the town board or the planning board, and they created 60-foot setbacks. So now what we're saying, instead of you shall do these things, it said you should do these things. So it's not anything that you can require. So everything under 6.200A is guidelines, and then everything that you see under 6.200B, those are the requirements. And most of the standards that we have under this current section will still fall under requirements. There's not any discretion involved. It's you either meet it or you don't. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. I will point out that Emily and I have had a discussion, and it is possible that we could take this consistency with adopted plans and move it over to a general requirement. Instead of saying that these regulations should be consistent, we can say that these regulations must comply. We can discuss or debate that in any way, shape, or form that we want to. I will also say I have the entire subdivision ordinance and the entire text amendments that I can get up on the screen, and we can talk in great detail if you choose to. The other thing I would want to point out is even if we do an administrative approval of subdivisions, and the administrative approval as a staff is still the town board if there's a developer that wants to modify their traffic impact standards. And that is, the ordinance says you cannot impact your intersections by a certain level, and they have to mitigate it, and the town board would have the ability to modify that mitigation. And why that's important is whenever you go fix an intersection, you can't fix it to the exact part that you have impacted it. It's probably going to be impacted and improved in a way that will improve that intersection far better than what your impact is. So this gives the town board the ability to basically give credit for when there are improvements that are above and beyond for a certain intersection, and give them credit for that at the other intersections. Also, the town board would still maintain the ability to approve any variances or appeals or interpretation from the subdivision ordinance that might be asked for. So those wouldn't change regardless if we go administrative and if staff approves the sketch plans. So with that, Mr. Chairman, again, this is the sections that we're changing. We want to go to all objective standards. There would be a neighborhood meeting, and planning board would not be going to, and it wouldn't go to the town board as is proposed. It could be a staff decision. But again, it is possible that you could disagree with the proposal and say that it should be a town board approval. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I am available. Emily is available to answer any questions. Anybody have any detailed questions? I'm happy to pull up the actual ordinances involved, and we'll just take it from there. So, Mr. Chairman, handle it any way you'd like.
Thank you, Jack. Commissioner Munger, I was able to watch the hearing the other night, and there was a considerable amount of debate, and I was wondering if you, just for the benefit of the folks that might not have been able to watch or attend that public hearing, if you maybe want to give folks kind of a synopsis of kind of how the town board was feeling about this particular topic.
It's obviously an issue that the board in general struggles with greatly. On the one hand, we want to be able to have some input in terms of what type of developments can be approved, and be able to have some of that negotiating ability. Obviously, one of the difficulties in that is that we cannot have any discussions prior to the hearing, and that causes a lot of angst amongst the board and residents as well, feeling that they're not being heard. And obviously, one of the issues is someone who comes before the board and wants to speak during quasi-judicial, there has to be a determination of whether or not they have standing, and not everyone understands whether or not, why they wouldn't have standing in that type of situation. So one of the possibilities that was discussed is we have a board of adjustments that does already handle quasi-judicial, is very familiar with how quasi-judicial works. The possibility of saying, well, maybe we kick it over to the board of adjustments, but that also has its own issue, because if we push it over to board of adjustments, yes, the town board is then at that point able to hear from constituents, but we have absolutely no say in how board of adjustments decides. And once the board of adjustments does make a decision, that is final. And so at that point, are you really solving the problem? It's very difficult to understand or to figure out what exactly is the best course of action. I mean, you really have, in my head, three options. You leave it with the town board of commissioners, and then we make the decisions. We were elected to make those decisions, so I understand that. You can kick it over to the board of adjustments. Board of adjustments members are appointed by the town board, so maybe that does make a sense, and they have that background, and that's what they do. Or staff handles it, and it becomes objective, if I'm using the terms right, rather than subjective. And what that essentially means, in short, is check the box. if the developer checks all the boxes, they get to get approval. And the only thing I will point back to is, and Jack, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I remember right, the number is 72% of all municipalities in the state of North Carolina do use the sub-objective.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Of
So-
the 275 jurisdictions, 72% use objective standards, correct.
Right. So in that, and if you look at the number, the 25,000 plus, that's 84%. We are well over 25,000 plus. So it lends itself to, well, that is what everyone else is doing. Maybe that is what we should be doing. I don't have a definitive answer. I'm very much in the listening mode. So I would love to hear some good banter regarding this topic. Hopefully I kind of hit everything there, Matt.
Thank you for that. Just want to make sure everybody had that insight. Frank, I've got you first, and Ms. Hallman, you'll be on deck. Go right ahead, Mr. Gammon.
Okay. Jack, I have two questions. I had three, but Commissioner Munger just answered that, and that was about whether, if it went to another board, could commissioners then speak with constituents, although they couldn't have any impact if it went to the Board of Adjustments. Let's say it went to the planning board, for example. If the process moves to the planning board, is there an appeal process from the planning board for the decision the planning board made?
Right. So let's just, I'm going to.
So it depends on whether or not it's quasi-judicial, Frank. This is Emily. So quasi-judicial decisions would then be appealed to court, regardless of whether or not the town board, the Board of Adjustment, or the planning board made the decision.
Because I knew it went from the Board of Adjustments that way. So there is an appeal process for the, I'll just describe, not the applicant, but the citizen. The next question is, this is a restatement, Jack, of sort of the question I asked in our last meeting. If we remove quasi-judicial and make it administrative and it comes to the planning department, consideration of Huntersville 24 community plan, smaller plans, and any impact upon residents is not considered at all by the planning department, correct?
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
Yeah, sure. If we make the quasi-judicial and make this process administrative out of the planning department, when the planning department makes its decision, the community plan, smaller area plans, and the impact upon residents is not part of the consideration. It's strictly zoning ordinance. I'm just confirming that's what the process is.
So as it was in your agenda packet presented at the public hearing, the consistency with adopted plans is under a guideline. It's over here on the left-hand side, not on the right-hand side, a requirement. What I did say in a conversation that Emily and I had this week was it would be possible that providing this provision of consistency with adopted plans, if we replace the should be consistent with must comply, we could put that under a general requirement. I don't think that answers your question, but I know it has some relationship to your question.
Right, and that's fine, because and you can school me again, my Yoda teacher, but if you have, because my understanding is we have zoning authority. In order to have zoning authority, you have to have a community plan. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so so for my simple mind, it seems to me that has to be considered if you're dealing with this process. You have to consider the community plan.
Yeah, I would, Emily and I both agree that it would make sense to make this adjustment and put in must comply and put it under general requirements. That would be our recommendation.
Yeah, that's all the questions I have right now. I'll have something later if a motion is made, but that's good. Thank you very much.
So, Frank, just as a follow-up, Jack, if you could click back on that slide, please. So if we do move that to the requirements section, that number 1, consistency with adopted plans, that would only leave 2 guidelines. Everything else that is currently in the ordinance that is objective would still be there and it would still be a requirement. The only two things that would be remaining if that is moved is the conformity and the relation to topography as general guidelines. So if it was an administrative decision, there'd really only be two that would become guidelines versus requirements. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Ms. Hellman. Amy, can you hear us? I'm not sure if she can hear us. And it looks okay. It looks like your screen was frozen. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you're up.
The deal I'm having with my computer today. The question I had at that moment has escaped me, but I had several others. With the general guidelines, though, if we're going to make this administrative, it seems like that section's not even relevant, because if they're general guidelines, they're not a box to be checked, and so a developer doesn't even need to pay attention to conformity or the other things. I mean, am I wrong about that?
That's a fair statement. There are sections of the ordinance where we recommend things, and it's not necessarily a requirement, so this would be in there. But to your point, a developer does not have to pay attention to it. It just lets them know this is something we think is important, but we would hope you do it, and that's what you would get out of that.
Okay.
But on the other hand, if it's something that has to go through a rezoning, the conditional rezoning process would still apply. So these two remaining general guidelines, yes, would be something that a developer would just consider. It's a should, not a shall. But if it's a conditional rezoning, which a lot of the subdivisions do have to go through conditional rezoning first, that still comes with the ability for the town board to, quote, negotiate for changes in the development plan for that individual site.
Okay. And in a rezoning, that's legislative, right? That's not quasi-judicial.
Correct. And usually the conditional rezoning would occur first and then the subdivision would come after that.
Okay. Is there, in what situations does a developer find himself under quasi-judicial hearings? I mean, I know special use and all that, and that's not what we're talking about. So for this particular issue we're discussing, how does a developer find himself under a quasi-judicial hearing?
So,
is that too big a question?
Well, no. I mean, it probably is, but I'll go ahead and try to answer it, and then Emily can chime in. So the reason why they find themselves in a quasi-judicial process is because we know we have some currently requirements that require application of some discretion, and so that puts them in there. And so when we in the subdivision ordinance, when we describe the process, we do say it's quasi-judicial, and this is the steps you have to go through. So does that answer the question, Amy? And Emily, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just follow that up with, it's really how some of these requirements are worded. So when you see things like, basically the bottom one is a good example where it says, and so far as practicable, that is subjective. So if it was something that was a clear black and white, meaning, let's say, for example, a 20-foot buffer, you either meet the 20-foot buffer or you don't, something that's a number, for example, that doesn't require the application of subjectivity. You either meet it or you don't. But a lot of the way that these terms are worded in our current ordinance, now I probably shouldn't say a lot because really, as we see here, we were able to change almost all of them except for the two remaining, said things such as maybe insofar as practicable or as much as possible, things like that, that makes it subjective. So when you reword it to make it objective, that removes it from the quasi-judicial process.
The other thing I can show you is, so I think you are now seeing the screen with the actual ordinance itself.
Yes.
And so as you go over to the sketch plan steps, today it says that, you know, we process it as a quasi-judicial hearing. And so we're striking through. So if you go to this page 22, number 5, the strike through says a subdivision sketch plan hearing will be conducted as a quasi-judicial hearing before the town board. And that's the reason we have that in there now, is because some of our standards require discretion. Once we get rid of that discretion, then we strike through all of this quasi-judicial process. I don't know if that helps any or not.
Right, because if we were to switch to administrative, then we wouldn't have sketch plans at all. Is that?
We still have the sketch plan. It would just be a staff approval. So, so we still would call it a sketch plan. It still would be kind of a general nature, roads, layouts, concepts, stormwater plans, etc. But it would be a staff decision under our proposal. But again, it is, the statutes also very clearly state that the decision making could also be a town board or a planning board. As a matter of fact, switch over to this. Another report from the School of Government, and I'm not going to get into the details up here. I can, but it gets to the points of who's the decision maker on these plats. And so 19% were individual staff person, 13% were technical review committee, 23% were planning boards, 37% were governing boards, and only 8% were other. That might be a board of adjustment, I don't know. So I guess getting to the point, this decision, while we are recommending it be a staff decision and following the guidelines from the School of Government, you can see from the results here, not everybody does that. That not everybody does that. So.
And one thing, Jack, to point out too, is that when you make the administrative decision a staff decision, then that decision, if it is appealed, would be run through the Board of Adjustment, because currently the Board of Adjustment hears all of the appeals of administrative decisions made by staff. There's an important distinction, because if you have the administrative decision go to the town board, for example, that would no longer be an administrative decision made by staff, and it would no longer be appealed through the Board of Adjustment. Instead, because the town board would be making that administrative decision, it would have to go straight to court. So that is an important distinction that we would need to understand as well, is even though, yes, it would become an administrative decision by staff, there's still an appeal process to go through. And if they wanted to then appeal it even further, that's when it would go to court. But if the administrative decision is made by the town board, which we don't recommend, and the reason we don't recommend that is because if it's purely objective and everything is met as far as the objective standards, the town board can only say yes. So really it adds time to the process. And if it's going to be administrative anyways, there's not a real reason to take it to the town board when all they can do is say yes if the requirements are met. And it also takes away the Board of Adjustment appeal process if it's by the town board instead of by the staff.
Okay, I'm sorry, everyone. I have two more questions. At first, the preliminary plat and a sketch plan I thought were different things, whether we call them something or the same or not, but I thought they were different. And when you showed me, Jack, the slide a minute ago, it said preliminary plat decisions. So that's why I said not a sketch plan. Yeah, that one.
Gotcha, right, yes.
But when Emily, when you say that when the decision goes to the town board and then it is for quasi-judicial, and we're talking about things being subjective versus objective, and all of a sudden there's no wiggle room for the town board to make any questions or concessions, or if you're telling us there, I believe, that they have to check all the boxes once it gets to the town board. I guess that's part of the process I don't quite grasp. So all of the wiggle room is for the staff, and once it gets to the town board, there's no more wiggle room? Is that what the rule is?
No, so I'll try to flesh that out a bit. So when it's purely objective, there's no subjectivity, it's black and white. It's either you meet it or you don't. There's no wiggle room in that. So that's if we're talking about administrative.
Right.
However, even when it is quasi-judicial, but it's quasi-judicial in a by right subdivision process, meaning that they don't first have a conditional rezoning. If it's by right, as long as they meet the requirements, and again, as we pointed out on that previous slide, there's really only a few requirements that even now contain subjectivity. For the most part, our current standards are objective. The only wiggle room is on those 2 or 3 subjective standards that we have. And I'll defer to Jack. I mean, I think it maybe seldomly comes up about the conformity, and he's got an example there. But I don't think it's something that you see with every single by right subdivision.
Right. So this was the subdivision that I was mentioning. It's on Maze Road. And when the neighborhood meeting was held, these neighbors noted that the lots were really close to these very, very large lots. And they said, well, we would like you to slide that over. And at the time, the developer said, well, this gray area is the minimum, and I'm at least meeting the minimum. So, that's how it was left. Then after the neighborhood meeting, I pointed out to the developer that the town board still has this requirement. It's a requirement today that says you shall be planned and facilitate most advantageous development of the neighboring area. And that, the neighbors could certainly come to the subdivision quasi-judicial hearing and say, hey, we are neighbors, we have standing. We have large lots. We don't have lots the same size as this. We've got much larger lots, and we think that section of the ordinance should, could be used to give us a little more buffer, to give us some more buffer. And so the developer, understanding that, then modified their plan before it went to the planning board and created that at least 60-foot buffer on this edge. So that was how that section was used, although because they already created a bigger setback, the neighbors did not show up and have to ask for it because the developer already made that adjustment. But that was a kind of a negotiated. The neighbors weren't saying just turn the whole development down because this is not advantageous to us, because the zoning of this property was such that the number of lots that they had out here were allowed, with meeting all the open space requirements, meeting all of the lot size requirements, the total number of counts were all complied with. But there was concern expressed at the neighborhood meeting that these things are just kind of too close to our big lots. And so that's how that was negotiated out.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Frank, I think you were had your hand up, and then Mr. Whitaker.
I've spoken once, so let Mr. Whitaker go.
Okay, Mr. Whitaker, you're up.
Okay, I'm having a little bit of trouble with can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have all confidence in the world that the staff can handle what is being proposed. That's not a problem. I was very concerned when Emily mentioned that the town board would have no option except to approve. I think taking the town, my only concern about this whole deal is taking the town board out of this process. And I hear about the appeals and I hear all that. I think from a public relations point of view, this is going to be, I don't know if I want to call it a disaster, but a a lot of the stuff I heard during the last election was about developments and slowing them down or speeding them up or let's have more or let's have less. And now to walk away from all that so that the town boards, when they get called, can say, hey, we don't have any choice. We don't have anything we can do about it. I don't think that's going to go over very big. And that's not, I guess, our decision. That's something the town board will consider when they decide whether they're going to do this or not. But that's my biggest concern. And when I heard Emily a minute ago say they'll have no option except to approve, that bothered me a little bit. The question I've got is, which process, the current process or the proposed process, is going to allow the citizen to have more input? Or is there a difference?
I'm going to try to answer that question, and Emily, please jump in at whatever point you think is appropriate. It is my opinion that the neighbors, the folks that are joining that, have more input in the quasi-judicial process, and it would be, as I mentioned, they could point to this section of the code that says that this developer shall locate this and plan this development so it's advantageous to us, and it's got all kinds of different language in here. So that's how I would answer your question, Mr. Whitaker. And Emily, anything you want to add or subtract from that?
So the only thing that I would say is that just by being a neighbor does not mean that the person will have standing when they come to the quasi-judicial evidentiary hearing. There's only specific parties that have standing. That's going to be the town, that's going to be the applicant themselves or the property owner, and someone who can usually prove special damages. And special damages is not going to be just because you live nearby or just because you can see the construction. That's something that would have to be proven with specificity. And so as far as being able to participate in the evidentiary hearing when it's quasi-judicial, that is limited to parties that have standing as far as being able to fully participate. Now, in the process, we do have the neighborhood meeting, and Jack is correct that the citizens can go, even if they don't have standing, and talk at the neighborhood meeting. But keep in mind, we are not suggesting getting rid of the neighborhood meeting. We are still suggesting that the neighbors be able to attend a neighborhood meeting, even if this is transitioned over to an administrative process. Just like it is now, the neighbors can go to the neighborhood meeting, they can talk about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they would have standing in our evidentiary hearing to come and speak or present evidence at that time. So really, they're getting pretty much the same amount of exposure at the neighborhood meeting as what they would currently have.
Emily, in this particular case that I have up here on the slide, these folks that were adjoining right in this area right here were the ones that objected and asked for more space. They said, we understand people have a right to develop, we just want more space. I would say these folks had standing, and so I would just ask your point on that. Would they have had standing if the developer said, heck no, I am not going to move this, it's going to stay at 20 feet? Would you say these property owners here had standing?
I wasn't here at the time, so it would be hard for me to make that determination. I'm not sure if they provided anything additional to try to establish standing, but being in proximity typically in and of itself is not enough to establish standing.
So I would just say that, and I apologize if I jumped on somebody, but these were property owners with houses that were on these big lots right here. And so I understand that somebody who might be, I can see it, but I'm not adjacent to it, might not have official standing, but it just seems to me that people who are adjacent to it would have standing. But and again, I apologize. I think I just stepped on somebody's comment. So I'm finished. Thank you.
It was me, Jack. It was Kathy. Emily, I had watched, went back and watched one of the for the Hills subdivision on Asbury Chapel Road. And when people were coming up to see if they were deemed able to speak, if they were an adjoining property owner, they were a witness.
I'm sorry, you broke up, Kathy.
No, they were a neighborhood. Okay, during that hearing, if the property owner were given standing, if they were in the neighborhood of the development, they were considered an interested party. So could you explain the difference between standing, interested party versus witness?
Yes. So the way it works is that the statutes only allow parties that can establish standing to fully participate in the hearing. And once they've established standing, then they can call witnesses, they can present evidence, they can offer rebuttal, etc. But if you're just a person that's considered a person of interest, you don't have a right by the statute to participate at all in the hearing. But the town board could allow you to speak. They're not required to. They may in their discretion. But anything that someone says that does not have standing typically is not going to be something that the town board could rely on to make their decision, because the decision has to be competent material, substantial evidence in the record. And typically, persons that are just interested are not offering that type of evidence. There may be an occasion where whatever the interested party says is not the interested person, whatever they say is not objected to by an actual party. In that case, like I said, the town board may allow that person to speak, but they're not required to. But there is a certain evidentiary standard for what the town board can consider in their decision-making process, and it has to rise to the level of that threshold to be part of the decision-making process, if that makes sense.
So just what I put up on the screen here is the Hills subdivision. It's off Asbury Chapel and Autumn Crest. And Kathy's right. At the time, these property owners that were immediately adjacent to the development were considered standing, and there were other folks that lived off of Autumn Crest and even on Autumn Crest that didn't join it, and they were considered interested parties, if you will. So I don't know, Kathy, if that helps. That's how it was handled at that hearing.
No, I actually said it incorrectly. The people in the neighborhood were considered witnesses, is what John called them. He would say, okay, you're a witness, or okay, you have standing because you have an adjoining property. So what is if you're a witness, what are you allowed to speak about?
You were breaking up, Kathy. I don't know if you heard that, Emily.
I didn't hear what she was asking, unfortunately. It sounds like there's a fan or something going in the background.
I think, Kathy, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but she was asking, what is a witness allowed to say in a quasi-judicial hearing versus an interested party, is I think is the gist of what she was asking.
So,
yes.
Okay, so a party, someone who actually has established standing, they can call witnesses. They can present evidence. They can call expert witnesses, for example. But if you are just an interested person without standing, the town board can allow you at their discretion. They're not required to, because there's no statutory right to participate. If you are an interested person, you cannot present evidence as far as documentary evidence. You cannot call witnesses. You cannot offer cross-examination. You cannot offer rebuttal, etc. If you are an interested person, you may be allowed at the town board's discretion to say something, but again, it's not going to be considered necessarily evidence presented by a party that goes into the record for consideration by the town board when making their decision on the quasi-judicial matter.
I will say, the Hills subdivision was kind of the touch point where the town board was very frustrated, as were the residents on Autumn, who were concerned. Stacy often talks about a mother who drives up and down, has children that play in this area, and she was not considered an expert witness. And so there was a lot of concern about that. After that hearing, the town board asked staff to attend these neighborhood meetings and be more proactive in explaining the quasi-judicial process. And so when we had our quasi-judicial meeting on the Mays Road, which happened to be really the first development kind of subdivision after the Hills subdivision process, that was the point where we had handouts for the neighbors about here's quasi-judicial. We had information on what the quasi-judicial process is, and so residents now are provided more information on this quasi-judicial process as a result of that hearing, and the board asking us to be more proactive in educating people on standing and interested parties and who has standing. And so I just wanted to get that out. Thank you.
Frank, you were up next, and I've got Lance and Amy after that.
Yeah, that's what Jack just said about how all this started is, commissioners are frustrated that they can't talk to anybody. So that's what, like Jack said, that they got the direction to look at doing it another way. But that said, if the process becomes administrative or it goes to another board, it doesn't matter if commissioners can communicate with constituents because the process is out of their control or influence. So the only way they can communicate and have influence and control is to have the quasi-judicial. At least those with standing or those that allow can communicate with the board and feel like that they've made contact with their commissioners. Moving it somewhere else, I don't think solves the frustration. I think it will create another frustration because it's these one way or the other. It's a different side of the same coin. You're going to be frustrated, I believe, either way you do this. But at least the one frustration with quasi-judicial is that at the hearing, you do get to communicate with constituents. That's all I have.
I do want to clarify something, and that is that if we go to all objective standards, and we do have the sketch plan and the neighborhood meeting, and instead of a staff decision, which is what we recommend, and it be a town board decision with a planning board recommendation, the town board can have conversations with the neighbors. It's just understanding that the rules are more black and white and there's not a lot of wiggle room, but at least the town board can participate in neighborhood meetings. They could have it to go to the planning board. That's not what we recommended. So I did want that point of clarification out there. Thank you.
Well, I would add to that, Jack, is I don't feel it needs to come to the planning board either.
The other thing I want to point out is what I'm pulling up online now is, again, as a result of the situation at the Hills, the town board asked us to be more proactive in explaining, the subdivision process. So when we send out notices and when we have our neighborhood meeting, there's this information sheet that, talks about, process and hearing and who has standing. And so, again, we're taking a more proactive stance, if you will, on trying to explain just what this quasi-judicial process is.
Thank you. I believe Lance, Commissioner Munger, you're up next.
Yeah, so I appreciate all the dialogue that's going. One of the things that I wanted to kind of cover a little bit on the quasi-judicial when it does come to the town board, the term I use is illusion of choice. We have an illusion of being able to say yes or no to a lot of things. And Jack, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but like on a block length waiver, a group comes in and hypothetically, let's say they actually have standing, which is very difficult to actually establish. If they want to talk to us about the density of the units, the look of the units, the price points, all kinds of different things, that's nice. It's not, it doesn't matter when it comes to a block length waiver. I mean, you have to be able to address a specific issue that they are looking for the board to be able to use its discretion to say yes or no. And all of the factors that have to do with how the houses look, the density, or any of those type of things have absolutely nothing to do with the block length waiver. And so that's why I use the term illusion of choice. We can hear all of those things, but unless they can actually find a fundamental reason, and it's probably going to be something to do with safety, and Jackie can probably hit all of the things that are specific to when we can make a block length waiver, but it has to be related to that, and they have to be able to provide expert testimony, and they have to be able to give us compelling evidence as to why we should deny a block length waiver. And that's why at this point, I appreciate the fact that Ms. Sloop pointed out that if we move it to administrative, they can actually appeal it to Board of Adjustments, as opposed to if it stays a quasi-judicial, it would have to be appealed through a court process. I find that aspect alone makes making an administrative decision more appealing. And honestly, coming into this meeting, I was 100% torn. No idea which way I was going to go, but I'm leaning towards suggesting that this shift to an administrative process. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Munger. Amy Hallman, got you up next.
Yeah, when we're talking about neighborhood meetings under administrative, though, it's not a neighborhood meeting like we would have now under quasi-judicial, right? I mean, that it turns into just an FYI type situation.
I'll try to answer that. I would just say that it would be a FYI, which is a big part of what happens today. But using this example, I hate to keep coming back to it, but I just want to utilize this. If these neighbors came to a neighborhood meeting and they say, we sure don't like that there's only 20 foot here and we want more, we would not have this language here is just, hey, Mr. Developer, you should do that. And it is not a requirement. So it doesn't have as much teeth as it does today for that particular example I just gave you.
Okay. Can only one person have standing if they're not the applicant or the board? Or?
So standings defined by statute, Amy, and so that statute says that it's going to be the town board or the town, the applicant, landowner, and also anyone who can establish special damages. More than one person can establish special damages. It's just that they have to be established with very specific showings of evidence, essentially.
Okay. And I think examples are a big deal when you say, in general, Jack, that that you all have been working really hard at educating the public on things. I've seen this example a lot. I still struggle to come up with other examples, and I'm not saying you need to do that right this minute, but that in general, if we're going to educate people on how to become involved, or, so they're not frustrated like the December 6th quasi-judicial hearing. That was really painful to watch. When people believe they have standing because they believe they have a specific issue, and they really, really believe it. and then they're just told, no, they don't. It's a struggle. And we live and breathe this process a lot, and it's pretty hard for us. So I think that we can still make some strides in educating people on how to, defend themselves, not legally, but, if they really do believe they have this concern, how to go about being heard and perhaps getting something done the way that they would like for it to be done. Not just, it all feels like it's pro-developer. And that's all I had to say.
Mr. Finley, I've got you up next, and then Mr. Whitaker, you're on deck.
Yeah, I have a comment and it'll turn into a question for Jack. I think Frank was onto something when he was talking about board members have this urge to participate and represent the constituents. Okay, and I believe in that too. The quasi-judicial process for me actually protects the board members, I feel. It makes it an even playing field where board members can't impact and influence things as much. If this goes to an administrative process, the objective list, which is about 72%, comes from the ordinance, comes from code, and we'll be able to look at a master plan for the community and all that. However, Jack, within the written text, what guardrails are in place to protect the administrative process from being impacted and influenced by board members interacting with staff?
Right. So if we go to this new process and its objective standards, and a development comes and it meets all those standards, the staff, will approve it. Are you asking, is there anything that would prevent the town board members to come into staff and saying, how can we do this? Because the board members can ask, but the ordinance is what the ordinance is, and we'll approve it.
But if it's not 100% checklist for objective decision making, if on average it's 72%, there's still some wiggle room there. Board members interact with staff right now. Apart from a really good culture that the mayor and the town manager create, where board members don't try and influence staff in decision making, are we open for a gap where we can drive a bus through if we've got board members that want to be very active and communicate with staff a lot?
Member Finley, I'm sorry. I think maybe you might be not understanding that 72%. The 72% is not the percentage of subjective standards that we have. The 72% was the percent of other jurisdictions, meaning cities, towns, counties, that are purely objective, meaning they do not have a quasi-judicial process. They do not have subjective standards. So with us being in the minority, we are in the 28% of all other jurisdictions across North Carolina. So if you look at the population marker that Jack had pointed out, the 25,000 plus, only 16% of jurisdictions with 25,000 plus in population use a discretionary standard. So that's what that chart is about. If we move to administrative approval process, it will be purely objective, black and white. You meet it or you don't. So there's no wiggle room there. If you don't meet it, you don't get approved. If you meet it, you get approved. So there's no way for the town board or any other board to influence staff. It has to be documented that the standard is met. And also, I would point you all to 160D 109C. There are specific conflict rules that also apply when the decision is made by administrative staff that they are bound to.
That helps a lot. Thank you, Emily.
No problem.
Mr. Whitaker, I believe you were next.
I've already got my question answered. I'm good.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up. It's amazing.
Oh, Matt, no. I didn't know how to raise my hand. I don't see my raise hand button.
There's, if you go down to the bottom of your screen and you click on the participants tab and open that up, at the bottom, that'll open up in a separate window, and at the bottom of that window, there's a little raise hand option down there.
There you go. Okay. All right. I have several questions, and I'm sorry because I had them in order, but now that some questions have been asked and answered, I'm having to try and reorganize. But the first thing is, okay, under the current QJ process, the town does have the ability in order to somewhat protect the surrounding landowners, like Jack was talking about with the Maze Road project. So if this process changes to administrative ones that are left out of the requirements column, would that take away the ability for staff to make concessions or ask for concessions for the sketch plan? Does that go away?
You were breaking up during that question, but I think in essence you were saying if it all goes to administrative process, does that take away the ability to ask for modifications to try to help the neighborhood? And the answer would be we would still ask for it. We would recommend it, but a developer doesn't have to do it. They would have to meet the minimums. If things look like they're heading in a bad direction and we keep having the same problem over and over again, then we would need to probably change our ordinance. That is always an option, to change an ordinance and maybe require a bigger setback. So I don't know if that answered your question, Kathy.
If you were thinking about moving the one thing over, could you not move conformities over as well and make it a requirement?
Yeah, so this, if we were to leave it, this language, that's where I think Emily is saying is just too broad of a requirement that you could put that into a general requirement. So I'll leave you, Emily, to answer that one. Emily, are you able to discuss?
We're having some technical difficulties.
Yeah.
So I'm not speaking for Emily, but when you read that paragraph, there are so many things that are subject to broad interpretation. And if we're going to an objective standard, how do you define, some of those things in there? A detrimental effect, most advantageous development. They're just, if we ask what the most advantageous development amongst the board, we're going to get, a different answer every person we go to. So
Right.
an objective standard, it's got to be something that's clear and another person can understand it, and it's not subject to, a lot of gray area.
And I understand that, but that's one of the few ways that the citizens have to give input. I mean, it's not a direct input, but they can, you know what I mean? They can have their concerns.
Yeah. So
at least by planning staff. Staff can intervene for them.
Let's think about this from, high level, okay? We have, on one side, we have the free use of real property and the property owner rights. And on the other side, we have the public interest, let's call that public health, safety, welfare. And our ordinance, in theory, is trying to find a balance between those two things. You've got fundamental property rights that are the by right aspects of whatever zoning that your property has, but you also are trying to balance this interest, this public interest. If you swing it one way too far or the other, things kind of get out of balance. So in this particular case, we want to have, if this does go to an administrative process, we want to have clear, objective requirements, because if they get into this subjective kind of realm, then it almost, it's really recommended that it kicks back to quasi-judicial. And I would argue there might be some other municipalities that are completely administrative, but they probably have some aspects of their ordinance that are very subjective. And I would say maybe it leads to maybe a little bit more litigation than the average municipality might otherwise have. So we're trying to find that balance here between these two things. And at the end of the day, you know, you've got to be comfortable with our zoning ordinance and what is a by right use in said zoning ordinance, and then ultimately in the subdivision ordinance. If the town board and citizens of the town are not comfortable with what those by right uses are, then there needs to be a relook at those things to make sure everyone's comfortable with them. Just talking high level related to the consistency, making that a requirement. Per the statute, comprehensive plans don't have any independent regulatory effect. I could see some potential problems there, because if you are locked into the comprehensive plan, let's say someone's zoning that they currently have on their property does not comply, the existing zoning does not comply with the comprehensive plan, and they go in under the existing zoning with a by right approval, and we have a provision that says you have to comply with the comprehensive plan, and the zoning and the comprehensive plan don't match. How does that get resolved? I mean, that could create some rather interesting issues during an administrative approval, I would imagine. I'm not sure that that's going to be the majority of the time, but it could certainly happen. So,
Okay.
Anyway, those are just general comments, very high level, kind of looking at this. I can see the benefit to going administrative. I imagine it would save a lot of time. I think that the reason why a lot of these large municipalities do this is because the town boards just don't have the time to do all this day-to-day stuff. The city of Charlotte doesn't have the time to approve a plan on a 5-acre parcel that they're splitting into 3 lots or something. Their meetings would never end if they had to do that every time. So I think that's why big municipalities go in this direction, because it's a time thing. They just don't have the time, and they've got to focus on more important issues. We're kind of in the middle. We're not necessarily a small town, but we're not a huge one either. So we're kind of in that middle range where we could still consider doing something quasi-judicial. So anyway, just a couple of quick comments there. Any other questions, Ms. Jones?
Yes, I had a question about the current process. So if there isn't supposed to be any ex parte communication regarding a project to the commissioners, why are the community meeting minutes included in the project packet that is submitted to them for their review?
So that is intended to just provide information to the town board as to what happened. They cannot rely and make a decision based on what they see in those minutes, just the same as the planning board. It's just information that they have. They can pursue questioning that might have been brought up in there, and as long as it's related to the criteria of the zoning ordinance, it's all fair game. But it is just information, but they can't base their decision on, well, this was said at the neighborhood meeting, and I agree with it, and therefore I'm going to make a determination to deny it. I don't know if Emily is able to speak yet. She's on this call. Yes. Go ahead, Emily.
That's correct. So nothing that's said at the planning board meeting can be considered by them as far as their decision. Really, if you have that information, like Jack said, from the neighborhood meeting, it's just making them aware if something was raised or if something was asked, but they can't consider that as evidence. It's not evidence that's in the record, and it's not going to be considered as meeting the threshold for evidence to base their decision on.
Okay. So going forward in an administrative process, would community meeting minutes still be submitted?
That's a fair
by the
question,
applicant?
and the answer would be no. It would not, because it's going to be, staff will be attending the neighborhood meeting because we do, and we just let people know what's going on. but there's not minutes that are taken of that meeting. And the town board and planning board are invited to those meetings and could attend those meetings freely. And I suspect some or many would.
But currently, for Quasi, they cannot attend those meetings.
The town board,
So the only information they actually see from the community meeting is the minutes that were taken by the applicant. So are there any measures taken by staff to ensure that those minutes accurately reflect all the pertinent information that was discussed by the applicant and the community attendees?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. So the meeting minutes are not verbatim minutes. And so anybody who's attended neighborhood meetings will know that there's sometimes multiple conversations going on at once. Bottom line is staff looks over the meeting minutes and makes sure that the general gist of it is covered. But I can tell you it is not possible to collect all the comments that are made and do verbatim minutes unless they are verbatim, and that requires a court reporter. So there are absolutely situations where some things could be discussed that won't be captured in the minutes. We do check it to make sure that the main topics are covered.
Right, I understand that it can't be verbatim, but you would hope that all the relevant information was included in the minutes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's all I have. And well, one more thing. Is there any way possible to keep the quasi-judicial process, but find some way where citizens have a way to give input?
You know, I'm going to jump in, and Emily, correct me if I'm wrong. Interested parties, the town board can and has allowed any folks to provide commentary and input on things. You know, and sometimes that's important just to hear and understand where your citizens are coming from, and it might inform you perhaps to change some laws and make things a requirement. So, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, you know, I think through the quasi-judicial process, to me, letting people come up and speak makes sense. I do understand that the town board has to make decisions based on evidence presented, and I think our board members are informed enough to know what can be considered evidence and what couldn't be considered evidence. So that's my commentary on it. And Emily, if you want to take it, go ahead.
Yeah, and what I will add to that is that if you allow anyone and everyone to speak at a quasi-judicial hearing when they don't have standing, that's a very slippery slope. And the reason being is because it's hard to determine, once a board member has heard so many different things from people that do not have standing, whether or not they would be able to remain impartial when they're making the quasi-judicial decision. You know, I had provided in the email that I sent you that the Supreme Court of North Carolina has held that even one member's bias in a quasi-judicial decision was sufficient to invalidate the entire decision and award compensatory damages. So, and in that case, the damages were about $80,000.
So Emily, say outside of the actual hearing of the project, during public comments at that same meeting, could someone speak during public comments that was not otherwise allowed to speak during the actual hearing?
Anyone can come and speak at the public comment period. The issue is that if the comments are made during the public comment period, just as if they were made by someone without standing at the quasi-judicial evidentiary hearing, it's just something that the town board cannot consider in the decision-making process.
Right, but anyone is allowed to speak during the public comments section of that particular meeting.
That's correct.
Okay, because it's really hard for a person to be able to speak during the actual hearing, because if they're not deemed an expert, they're going to have to go out and hire an expert to advocate for them. And not everyone has that kind of money at their disposal. And then if they do go out and hire someone, and then once it gets to the hearing and they're told, well, no, you're really not deemed an expert, then they're out of the money and they're not being heard. So it's sort of all geared against the citizen, and it's mainly geared for the applicant. And it's just very frustrating when you feel like you're being muzzled, and you're not, nobody wants to hear from you. I'm done.
I think those are fair comments. Let me just say that the town has zoning standards and development standards and landscaping standards and parking standards and lighting standards and stormwater standards. And so, these standards that are in these books are intended to be out there to protect the public.
And they're generally higher standards than a lot of the other municipalities around. They're at a higher quality level and a higher standard than you could arguably say of a number of the municipalities in and around Charlotte Market. I'm sorry, Jack, but I just wanted to add that.
No, I think that's a fair comment. I'll just take a look at this zoning map here. And this is, when I got here in 2001, this area here all to the east and all to the west was zoned open space OPS district that allowed 2.5 units an acre. And there was a tremendous amount of citizen concern that everything that was happening, particularly out here in the western side where sewer was just not good for the community. So there was an election, there were new town board members elected, they put a moratorium on development, and we re-looked at the long-range plan with citizen input, and citizens basically said we wanted to see less intensity of development, in the town board in 2003 downzoned this property to rural at 0.9 units an acre with 45% open space. Then you can get up to 4.9 units an acre, and in the transitional 1.5 units an acre with 40% open space. And you can kind of look at our neighbors to the south, and these are actually lots that you're looking at here. And there's so many of them, it just looks like a gray blob, but there's lots. So we're much lower density. So I do want to get that on the record that we do have development standards, and so it is not just come on in and develop. There are standards that have to be met, and as Matt has said, that they're certainly much more restrictive than what you might find in Concord or Cabarrus or Charlotte. But I understanding that people also have the right to develop property. And so if they sell their property to a developer and that developer meets these standards, then it's going to get approved. And if folks don't like the standards, you change the standards. And what I showed and discussed back in 2003 was an example of that. Thank you.
Okay, Amy, I see you got your hand up, but we have got 3 minutes left.
I just wanted to know one little thing.
Hang on 1 second. I want just to quick throw something out to the board. We can either agree to extend the time today. We can agree the public hearing is extended to June the 6th.
That's correct.
And our next ordinance advisory board is the 2nd of June, which would be before that hearing.
Yep.
Matt, I have a motion on your comment.
Okay, hang on. So we need to throw that out there. Mr. Finley also wanted to talk about meeting in person. I think we're just going to have to go over by a few minutes today. If everybody's okay with that, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Let Ms. Hallman ask her question, Frank, and then we'll get right to you, okay? Ms. Hallman.
Sorry, I just wanted to know what that North Carolina Supreme Court ruling was. Like, I see the email, but maybe I'm just missing it.
No, that's a good point. I didn't include the citation. I'll send that out to the group.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, Mr. Gammon.
Yeah, but I do have another motion. My motion was to extend the meeting if you need that. If we don't need a motion to do that, I'm I'm happy extending because I think we're close to concluding this.
I don't
Okay,
think
I
we
was
need
just
a
gonna say,
motion.
if we need to continue it until the next meeting, we've got a meeting in between now and the next public hearing, so if we need to spend some additional time on this, we can, or we can do a special meeting in the meantime, or whatever. So I just want to throw that out there. I'm sorry, Jack, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, just to keep going and discussing doesn't require, there's nothing in the rules of procedure that say the meetings have to stop at 5 o'clock. There is another meeting tonight at 6 that I have to go to, so if you can keep it from happening close to that, so that would be really appreciative. I really appreciate that.
Well, you need 30 minutes to prep and get there, I would say at least, Jack, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got to cut this off at 5:30, no later than 5:30 today because of that. Okay, so with that being said, Mr. Whitaker, I think you've got some comments. I've got a couple of things I want to throw out there, some technical things just that I haven't really addressed. But Mr. Whitaker, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just got a question. If we are getting close to making a decision on this, there are some issues out there within the document that are either or, and one's on the screen now, and maybe it's the only one, where the decision can be staff decision or town board decision, or planning board even. So before we're ready to approve this change, I would think we would need to see a final copy of it. In other words, we can't approve this based on the staff or the planning board or the town board meeting. I'd be in favor of the town board making that decision. Make it objective, but make the town board, for instance. So, am I wrong? How many of those things do we have hanging out there that
you don't have to have a neighborhood meeting. I think everything that I've heard, folks see value of at least letting neighbors know about it. But really, when it comes down to the decision making, that's kind of a big one, Mr. Whitaker. About is it going to be staff as the draft is written, or is it going to be the town board? If it's the town board or the planning board, then we're going to have to make some edits to what's in the ordinance today and say it's not the town staff, it's the town board that makes these decisions.
So,
yeah, that's my point. That's what I'm saying. I think we need to figure it out. I don't know how many of those decisions are still pending. I know this is one because it's on the screen, but we need to make some decisions about that, I guess.
So I'd probably suggest that the group first consider whether they want it to remain quasi-judicial or if they want it to be administrative, then go from there. Because if you want it to be administrative, the only other real decision is who makes the administrative decision. And as Jack and I have been discussing with you all, the reason that the School of Government and that Jack and myself recommend, if you do move it to administrative, that it be staff, is because if all the boxes are checked, if it's all black and white and they meet all of them, the only thing that the town board could do would be to approve it. So what you've done is you've added on quite a bit of time to the approval process because you'd have to wait for it to reach the level of a town board agenda. And as I mentioned before, if you keep it as an administrative decision by staff, they would still have the opportunity to appeal it to the Board of Adjustment. Whereas if the administrative decision is made by the town board, it would have to go straight to court.
Well, I understand that. I'm just trying to keep the town board involved.
well, it really comes down to you either have objective standards and it's administrative, or you have some wiggle room and you go quasi-judicial. I mean, that's really the crux of the issue. Then it gets into all the technical aspects for, the amendments we're talking about to the subdivision ordinance and the zoning ordinance. So that's really the major issue here. If you go administrative and staff makes that decision, parties have the ability to appeal to the Board of Adjustment. That's a positive in my opinion because you don't get the courts involved in the cost of doing that. If And it's going to save time because you're not having to go to the planning board, you're not having to go to the town board. It makes things a little bit more efficient and less expensive. From a public involvement standpoint, you get the neighborhood meeting. Does that have any impact on it? No. You know, you're able to vent and kind of get your thoughts heard, but does that change the ordinance necessarily? Maybe on the next one it would, if there's enough concern that the town board would want to change the ordinance or aspects of the zoning ordinance related to by right approvals. On the quasi-judicial side, takes longer. There's really not that much wiggle room that the town board has. I mean, there's some, but it's very limited. And there's more just administrative burden going through all those, you know, planning board, neighborhood meet, you know, all those extra steps. So it really comes down to which road do you want to turn down, administrative or quasi-judicial? That's really what it comes down to. And there's pluses and minuses to both. But again, if we need to continue this discussion beyond the next 25 minutes, we have another meeting scheduled in between now and the continued public hearing, and we can push this to the next meeting on the 2nd and continue to ferret this stuff out. And it may be good, staff, if we had just kind of almost a table that says, if you go this direction, pluses and minuses. If you go this direction, you know, just aspects of it, just at a very high level, just to, you know, drill those things down so everybody has a clear understanding. I mean, when you do an administrative approval, there is almost no discretion. Staff just, it's check the box, or it's yes or no. And if any of those boxes check no, correct, Jack, that you basically have to turn it down until that box is checked yes.
Correct.
So if you know, you can't let one box be no, but you know, all boxes have to check yes. So that's really the decision of the, you know, from a high level, that we've got to define which direction to go, and then we can get into some of these other aspects of the tweak of the actual subdivision ordinance and zoning ordinance.
I'm not sure about everybody else. I can do a decision tree today, steady pushing it in next month.
Okay, so you're ready to go.
Yeah, I think so.
Cameron's ready to go too.
Okay, all right. Well, if that's the case, then I'm gonna open this up for a motion and then discussion.
Thomas, you have a motion? If not, I have one.
Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
All right. The Ordinance Advisory Board recommends the approval process for major subdivision sketch plans remain a town board conducted quasi-judicial process as stated within the ordinance.
I second.
Okay, so we have a motion to leave things as they are, basically, as quasi-judicial. Do we have any discussion? Kathy Jones seconded that motion.
Yeah, well, since I made the motion, I'll make a statement. And why? I think that the public will have more input in the quasi-judicial than they would have in any other process. And that the primary reason for changing this now for us was not for efficiency or anything else. It was out of commissioner frustration. So that's all I got.
Okay. Any additional discussion? Mr. Whitaker, did you have your hand up?
No. Do I?
Okay, Ms. Holman then.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing Frank said. Is I believe that the major frustration was the citizen outcry, and I'm not sure that gets resolved with an entire administrative decision. If we had brought this out further, I mean, maybe you could have convinced me, but at the moment, I'm not sure that you can give the public and the board members that communication that they want. Either way, but at least they get a tiny bit of it with the quasi-judicial. That's all.
Okay. Any additional discussion? Hearing none. All right, we'll do a quick roll call. Matt Jones. God, I don't know which way to vote on this, honestly.
Well, you get paid big bucks.
Yeah, they doubled my pay the last time too. I don't think I've ever had this kind of problem. All right, I'm gonna just come to me last. Tim Taylor.
Tim Taylor, disapprove.
Okay. Oppose. Thomas Finley.
No.
Oppose. Frank Gammon.
Yay.
Approve. Amy Hallman.
Yes.
Approve. Kathy Jones.
Yes.
Thomas Klutz. Oh, I'm sorry, Joseph Klutz.
Not approved.
Okay, opposed. Brandy Skelly.
Oppose.
Harrison Whitaker.
Yes.
Approve. And I'm going to oppose. Matt Jones opposed. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 5 opposed, 4 approved. So motion fails. All right. So that's where we are.
Can we make another?
We can open it up for I'll open it up for another motion on the floor if anybody wants to do that.
I'll stumble through it. I might need your help, Matt, or someone else, but I'd like to make a motion that sketch plans, preliminary plats, and final plats move to an administrative process for approval.
Okay. Do we have a second?
This is Joe Klutz, I second.
Okay, Joe Klutz, second. All right. I would like to make a substitute motion, expanding on the motion that Mr. Finley made, with the additional caveat that a number of the some of the overriding issues that I commented on will be addressed in the text, and that we thoroughly review the text that we're proposing in the next meeting. And we're just talking about whether we're going to quasi-judicial or administrative in this particular decision, and not necessarily approving all the text that has been presented by staff, because I think there's some technical things that we need to further discuss at the next meeting. So that is my substitute motion. Do I have a second?
So,
Tracy, this is Joe Klutz, or Matt, this is Joe Klutz. I do accept that motion, secondary motion.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay. Okay. Does everybody understand what we're voting on?
Let's repeat it one more time.
Okay. So, Mr. Finley made a motion to go to an administrative process for, I don't have the thing in front of me right now, subdivision plats, sketch plans. Hang on, I'm pulling this back up.
Matt, I'm going to ask a question. Did you make a substitute motion, or did you make an amended motion?
I made a substitute motion.
And you don't need anybody's permission to do that. You just need a second.
Okay.
And I'll let Emily or Jack chime in on that.
Yeah, I think a substitute motion is acceptable, and then you see if there's a second. If there's a second, then that's the motion. If it's an amended motion, then it's up to the person who made the motion to accept that amendment. So if, Matt, you're saying it's a substitute, then it's a second to that.
We'll call it an amended motion right
That's
now,
fine.
since they approved it.
Yes.
And I was expanding on their motion, basically to move the by right process for sketch plans and plats per TA 2205 to an administrative process from a quasi-judicial But we're just voting on whether to go from administrative from quasi-judicial, and we're not necessarily approving the text that has been presented by staff yet. We will postpone that to the next meeting to get into a little bit more of the technical details that may need to be addressed that we probably don't have time for today. Does everybody understand what I'm saying there? Everybody?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to put that to a vote. Or is there any discussion? I'm sorry. Okay. Hearing none. Matt Jones, approve. Tim Taylor,
Tim Taylor, approve.
Thomas Finley,
Approve.
Frank Gammon,
Nay.
opposed. Amy Hallman,
No.
opposed. Kathy Jones,
No.
Joseph Klutz,
I approve.
Brandy Skelly,
Approve.
Harrison Whitaker.
No.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's 5-4, so motion passes. So we will pick the technical aspects up of this at the next meeting. And discuss some of the actual text changes on that at that point. Mr. Finley had asked a question about starting to meet back in person. I'd like to open the floor up for discussion on that point, and we can vote on that as well. So I'd like to put that out for discussion and a vote.
I'm all for it. I think it's a good idea. I think we'd get much better understanding between ourselves, and we wouldn't have the problem with broken up video and audio and that kind of thing.
I agree.
I'm in favor of it, meeting in public, in person.
You just missed seeing Matt. Let's be honest, Tim.
That's what it is. Separation issues.
Yes.
Okay,
Matt, this
so-
is Joe Klutz. I think it's a good idea. I think it's time to start moving back in that direction.
Frank
Okay.
Gammon's bored if I get to pick the bar.
Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah, meeting in a boardroom is not fun. We should do it in a public place. It's a public meeting, so. Anyway, all right, Ms. Kelly, how you feeling?
I think I can probably just follow what everyone else is comfortable with. I don't have a strong opinion about it anymore.
Okay, all right. All right, well, I'll put that to a quick vote to go back to meeting. The only caveat is I might not be able to make it if we're actually in person the next time. Maybe recovering from a minor surgical procedure, but we'll see. I may have to reschedule that.
Matt, sorry to jump in. If we meet in person up at the town building, we will have the capability for someone to call in for different situations like yourself, though, right?
Yeah. So, Tracy, would we have the ability? Would in the event I can't make it in person on June the 2nd, and I need to participate remotely, would that still be an option if everybody is in the same room and I'm not? And could I participate remotely? Is there a way to do that? If we met in town hall, could we? I think streaming the meeting is good for transparency with the public. Is there any way of doing that inside the rotunda? Okay. All right. So you'll look into that. All right. Okay. And being able to participate remotely in the event that I might need to. All right, we'll put that to a quick vote, going back to in-person meetings with the location to be determined in between now and June the 2nd. Matt Jones, approve. Tim Taylor,
Tim Taylor, approve.
Thomas Finley,
Approve.
Frank Gammon,
Frank Gammon, approve.
Amy Hallman,
Approve.
Kathy Jones,
Approve.
Joseph Klutz,
Approved.
Randy Skelly,
Approve.
Harrison Whitaker.
Approved.
Okay, all right. That's all we've got. Staff, any other questions, comments, concern before we adjourn?
So,
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. I'm approving. Tim Taylor,
Tim Taylor, approve.
Thomas Finley,
Yes.
Frank Gammon,
Approve.
Amy Hallman,
Approve.
Kathy Jones,
Approve.
Joseph Klutz,
Approved.
Brandy Skelly,
Approve.
Harrison Whitaker.
Approved.
All right. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and we'll.
Hey, Matt.
Yes, ma'am.
Matt, today is Amy's birthday. Everybody wish her a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Amy.
happy birthday, Amy.
Bring a cake next month.
There we go. We'll have it catered. Have a good day. Great
Thank
seeing
you.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one. Safe.